I believe it was the bard William Shakespeare who first said, if you don't have anything nice to say, then you're probably a nerd on the internet. And yeah, I know that that's kind of apocryphal, but yeah. It's probably also true, and I'm going to exemplify that today because the best I can come up with here is a backhanded compliment, but that's kind of the point of this video. I watched what at the time of recording was the most recent hbomberguy video, the second in his measured responses on Bill Nye and gender, and I actually admittedly only watched it to see if he'd continue to be a hypocrite by softballing the guy he liked, even though he mocks trans people openly, and then savagely attacking other people for being transphobic or ignorant or close-minded. Spoilers, he did. But he did do one thing that actually kind of surprised me. At the end of his video, there is a video clip from Zinnia Jones. hbomberguy actually contacted a trans person. That trans person disagreed with him on trans issues, and he put up the video anyway and admitted to the fact that there was another perspective being offered here that he hadn't considered. And that was so goddamn refreshing I almost fell out of my chair. One of the tiring things, admittedly among many, about being in a disadvantaged group is that there is this issue with not only having to watch yourself around, say, bigots, people who are openly against you, but also having to be guarded around your allies lest you offend them and lose them as allies. And at first blush, this may sound like a pretty minor thing. It may sound like a first world problem sort of deal. Oh, wow, you're going to get criticism on the internet that's going to hurt your feelings. Too bad. Except in the LGBT community, I've seen allies turn outright violent when their ideas are challenged. This is a problem. I have grown up my entire life with this message that I need to check myself around my allies lest they hurt me. And the idea that you should be afraid of your allies is ridiculous. It is mind-blowing that this is so normalized in our culture. And yet, in a movement that is ostensibly all about people like me, people like my friends and community, we end up being the ones who are sort of superfluous, that it gives the impression of, shh, the important people are talking, don't mess this up. One of the ironies is that the only place that I really expect to see any sort of value to LGBT individuals in the LGBT rights movement and in LGBT discussions and whatnot is as the token gay or trans friend to that straight, cisgender, white dude who is so important that he has to talk over everyone else. Now, admittedly, I do see more of this online than I do offline, and there's probably a good reason for that. Well, I mean, besides my general misanthropy, there's kind of a disconnect in online and offline discourse, and it's something that can sometimes be a shock to my system. You see, when I go out into the real world and deal with people who are championing LGBT issues, most of them are LGBT. Most of them actually have a dog in the fight, some experience, more than just having a trans friend or a gay friend or a bi friend or whatever. I notice this a lot with feminism, too. Feminism online seems to be primarily straight white men arguing with each other over women's issues. And then I go and talk with feminists in real life, and the majority appear to be, women. Can't imagine why women would be more interested. And yet, you get to the internet, and this is a great place for straight, white, cisgender dudes to talk over any disadvantaged group because they're used to being the only ones that are heard. And that's what it comes down to, I think. There's this argument that people are virtue signaling online. But having been condescended, demeaned, and otherwise written off by the Steve Shives Social Justice Squad, I don't think that's the real problem. I don't think it is virtue signaling. I think it is a word that guys like Steve Shives bring up a lot. Privilege. These people talk about privilege a lot, and yet they don't seem to truly understand it. And I'm not sure that they can entirely do so because they are in a position where everyone is supposed to hang off their every word. And as long as you can get one gay person or trans person or woman or whatever to validate you, then it's all good. Admittedly, I'm probably singling out Steve Shives because he has done this to me specifically, but he also did this in the context of being one of those people who claimed that you need to listen to minorities, to the LGBT groups, to the disadvantaged people like women who aren't, strictly speaking, a minority group. But I dare to disagree with him, and when it comes to LGBT issues, who's going to know more, Steve Shives, who has a trans friend, or somebody who's actually lived through these issues and deals with them on a daily basis? Obviously, I just can't compete with him. But sarcasm aside, there are reasons that minority groups tend to be distrustful of outside interests, and this is one of those reasons, because it is exhausting to have to walk on eggshells to try and coddle people lest you offend them by daring to correct them or challenge them on issues that they don't deal with personally, lest you draw their ire, because not only can they turn hostile, condescending, aggressive, demeaning, abusive, they can turn threatening and violent. These are serious threats. Less so over the internet, but still. Hell, there are very few people that I trust enough to speak openly on issues like this, because history has shown me that very few people are actually deserving of any sort of trust, that the so-called allies, the so-called feminists, the so-called LGBT activists, the so-called social justice warriors will eventually pull a Joss Whedon if their sensibilities are at all threatened, because in the end, isn't it really about the perspective of the straight, cis, white male? Yeah, I think we all know that it is. But to continue my damning with faint praise, hbomberguy did basically the absolute minimum that should be expected. He didn't even go so far as to necessarily change his views, and to be honest, my skepticism about people who claim to be progressive is such that I would be very, very shocked if he legitimately changed his outlook because he talked to a trans person and didn't immediately start screaming and flinging poo at them. I mean, the sad thing is that this is a bar that really should be so absolutely low that you'd have to dig to not be able to pass over it without difficulty. You would literally need to start blasting bedrock so that you could trip over it. And yet, that act, that very, very basic minimum act, was enough to actually not only shock but impress me. And that's how low my standards have become, because that's what I've come to expect from allies. Thanks for listening. Amaranth out.